Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a peaceful landowner in Colorado built his dream life off the grid, he never imagined his biggest threat would come from a smug HOA president named Karen, who decided his private road belonged to her entire neighborhood. Big mistake. This war over gravel? It got federal. Tom Harper had spent most of his adult life building his tech consulting firm from scratch, and when he finally sold it at 42, he knew exactly what he wanted: solitude. Not isolation, but peace. He found it nestled in the southern hills of Colorado, 80 acres of open space with rolling meadows, pine-dotted ridges, and a small creek running along the eastern border. The crown jewel of his property, though, was the long, winding, 2-mile road that cut through the land from the main highway. It was private, fully owned, and maintained by Tom, and he took great pride in keeping it graded, graveled, and clearly marked with crisp white signs. Private road, no trespassing, not a through street. The property had been a ranch decades ago, and the road, carved into land long before modern development arrived, was registered as a private drive in the county records. When Tom bought the place, he had the title company triple-check every easement and land use filing. There were none. The road belonged solely to him, with no shared access rights or public obligations. It was part of why he bought the land in the first place. He renovated the old farmhouse into a spacious, modern home, built a stable for horses, and installed solar panels along the southern slope. For the first time in his life, Tom could breathe. Days on the ranch passed with a rhythm he hadn't known he needed. Sunrise rides along the trail, evenings on the porch with a book and bourbon, and the satisfying silence that comes when you're far enough from traffic to hear only the wind through the grass. Delivery drivers were the only regular visitors, and even they knew to call ahead for the gate code. Tom kept to himself, but wasn't unfriendly. If hikers wandered too close to the property line, he'd give a polite wave and a gentle reminder that the land was private. For a year and a half, everything was exactly as he'd hoped, until the trucks came. First one, then several, hauling construction equipment and prefab housing materials. A new subdivision was going up just past his western boundary, on land that had once been grazing pasture. Willow Creek. The sign read, a glossy real estate dream of tidy lawns and cul-de-sacs. At first, Tom shrugged it off. Growth was inevitable. As long as they stayed on their side of the fence, he had no reason to interfere. He had no way of knowing that his private road would soon become the battleground for something far bigger and far more absurd than he could ever have anticipated. It began innocently enough, or so it seemed. One early morning, as Tom sipped his coffee on the front porch, he noticed a silver Lexus SUV rolling past his front gate, cruising slowly down his private road. He frowned. Visitors were rare, and none ever came without calling. The vehicle didn't stop at his house. Instead, it turned around near the barn, then drove off the way it came. Odd, but not alarming. He assumed it was a lost driver, or perhaps a nosy real estate agent from the new Willow Creek development scouting views. But over the next week, the sightings increased. Different vehicles, some SUVs, some sedans, began appearing along the drive, often in the early morning or around school pickup time. At first, Tom thought they were just a few persistent shortcut seekers, but when tire marks started appearing on the freshly graveled shoulder and packages were delayed because delivery vans couldn't get past the sudden stream of traffic, he knew it wasn't random. Someone was treating his private road like a public street. Then came the day he met her. Tom was installing a new no-through traffic sign at the base of the road when the same silver Lexus pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a woman in her 50s with sculpted blonde hair, a pristine white blouse, and sunglasses worth more than his fence tools. She smiled like she was doing him a favor. "You must be the landowner," she said cheerfully. "I'm Karen Reed, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. We've been meaning to talk." Tom set down his drill and gave a cautious nod. "Okay, about what?" "Well," she began, drawing out the word like she was reading from a script. "As you probably know, your road is the only direct route between the new western entrance of Willow Creek and County Road 18. Right now, our residents are having to take a long detour just to reach the main road. It adds almost 6 minutes. Since your drive is already in place and connects perfectly, we figured we'd just use it temporarily." Tom blinked. "It's not a public road." "Oh, I understand," she said quickly, as if waving away a minor inconvenience. "But since it's been unmonitored and open, we assumed it was an unclaimed easement. You know how these things go. Roads get shared all the time in rural developments." "No, they don't," Tom replied. "This is my property. The road is deeded. You have no easement, and no one has permission to use it." Karen's expression tightened, the smile growing thin. "I think we can find a compromise here. After all, your road benefits from our neighborhood now. Property values, safety. We even discussed maintaining the gravel for you, just as a courtesy." Tom stared at her in disbelief. "Let me be absolutely clear. This road is not for your use. Not now. Not ever. Your people are trespassing." Karen's tone shifted, growing brittle. "Well, that's not very neighborly. We assumed a more cooperative attitude would prevail. I'd hate for this to escalate into something formal." But it already had. Tom knew the language of subtle threats when he heard them. He didn't argue further. He simply turned back to his post and continued drilling the sign into the ground as Karen pulled away, tires spinning a little faster than necessary. From that moment forward, things changed. Traffic increased, noticeably. Cars from Willow Creek rolled down his road in the dozens. Some even honked if he was out walking his dog, like he was the one in the way. Karen had clearly told her residents to continue using the drive, regardless of his objections. It was no longer careless. It was organized, entitled, and intentional, and it was just getting started. Tom wasn't the type to overreact. He'd dealt with investors, city planners, and shady vendors in his past life. He knew the difference between irritation and liability, and what was happening now had crossed that line. The traffic wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a legal and financial risk. If someone got injured on his road, slipped on ice, or hit a deer, I could be the one getting sued, not to mention the wear and tear on a road he paid to maintain. It was time to act. The first step was documentation. Tom installed 2 discrete trail cameras at opposite ends of the road, both motion-triggered and time-stamped. Within 3 days, he had over 300 photos of vehicles passing through, SUVs, minivans, sedans, all with visible plates. Some cars passed 2 or 3 times a day. He cross-referenced timestamps, tracked usage, and logged the data. This wasn't casual traffic. This was a pattern, routine, systematic, and undeniably unauthorized. He drafted a formal cease and desist letter citing property law, referencing his deed, and attaching copies of the road's title and plat map, showing it was wholly on his land. He even included a printout of Colorado trespassing statutes, underlining the parts about private drives and posted property. Then he hand-delivered copies to Karen Reed's home address and the Willow Creek HOA office. He expected resistance, but he didn't expect the newsletter. Within a week, Tom received a copy of the Willow Creek Community Bulletin in his mailbox, clearly not addressed to him, but deliberately delivered. On page 2, in bold font beneath a stock photo of a country road, was a message titled, "Community Access Concerns, Working Through Challenges Together." The write-up framed the private road as a shared community connector, claimed there was a long history of informal use, and suggested that certain landowners were misunderstanding the communal nature of transitional development. Tom's jaw clenched. It was a PR spin, a way of laying groundwork for a legal challenge. But the real gut punch came 2 days later when he was served with a notice of intent to file suit. The Willow Creek HOA, led by Karen, was officially claiming a prescriptive easement. According to the filing, consistent and open use by residents entitled them to permanent access rights. It was outrageous. The road had been used by their vehicles for barely 2 months, and only after Karen herself had initiated the trespass. Prescriptive easements required years of unchallenged use, not weeks. It was a desperate move, but one that could still cost Tom tens of thousands in legal fees to fight. He retained a property rights attorney who reviewed the documents and gave him a firm nod. "You've got everything in your favor, but we'll need to shut this down cleanly. That means proactive steps, fast." Tom didn't wait. He ordered new high-visibility signage with language reviewed by his lawyer. "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." He reinforced the road's entry with reflective posts and gravel bumpers. He also sent certified letters to the HOA and the county clerk, reasserting his sole ownership of the road and officially denying any claim of easement. And still, they came. Cars drove around his posts. Some residents shouted at him from their windows. One man even slowed to yell, "You don't own the world, buddy!" before speeding off. Tom didn't yell back. He didn't argue. Instead, he began to build. The gate would be next. The gate arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered in pieces by a flatbed truck, and accompanied by a crew of installers Tom had vetted personally. It wasn't just any gate. It was a 12-foot wide, steel-reinforced, solar-powered security barrier with keypad entry, license plate recognition, and backup battery operation. Mounted beside it was a weatherproof box housing an intercom system and a high-definition surveillance camera angled to capture every driver's face. This wasn't just about keeping cars out anymore. This was about making it unmistakably clear the road belonged to Tom Harper and no one else. Within 2 days, the gate stood tall across the entrance to the drive, flanked by fresh gravel mounds and bordered by a wrought iron fence that extended 10 feet in each direction. The signs were larger now, backlit, and impossible to ignore. Private road, no public right-of-way, access by permit only. Another placard positioned squarely beside the keypad read, "Violators will be charged a fee for unauthorized use." Tom's lawyer had been deliberate in that language. By placing a gate and publicly notifying users that continued access would be met with monetary consequences, Tom was laying the groundwork not just for deterrence, but for restitution. And to make it legal, he had filed an official notice of toll enforcement with the county. Obscure, maybe, but binding. Any non-authorized vehicle using the road after this date would be liable for trespass and for toll collection through civil claim. The very first day the gate went live, a silver Lexus pulled up and stopped abruptly. The driver rolled down her window, stared at the keypad, then stepped out, heels crunching against gravel. Karen Reed. Tom watched from a distance, standing near his barn with arms crossed. She didn't see him at first. She was too busy jabbing buttons on the intercom, her voice tinny and frustrated through the speaker. "This is ridiculous. You can't just block an entire neighborhood's access. This is vindictive." He keyed in through his phone's app. "Good morning, Ms. Reed. Please leave. You're trespassing." There was a long pause. She spun in place, eyes locking onto him across the field. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Harper. You're not bigger than a homeowners association." Tom smiled grimly. "No, but I am the owner of this road, and you're now being recorded." Again, Karen huffed, climbed back into her car, and reversed back down the drive. For a few days, the traffic died down. The message seemed to be working, but Tom knew better than to relax. On Friday morning, just before dawn, he received a notification on his phone. Gate system error. Manual override detected. He rushed out of the house and reached the entrance just in time to see a red pickup truck trundling past the open gate, its wiring panel clearly tampered with. A few feet away, the control box hung ajar, its casing scratched, and the override switch flipped. Tom retrieved the security footage immediately and called the sheriff's office. The video was crystal clear. A man in a Willow Creek maintenance uniform using a set of tools to pry the box open, guided via phone by none other than Karen Reed, her voice audible through the intercom mic, giving step-by-step instructions. "Cut the red wire, then reset it manually. He's bluffing, I promise." The deputies arrived that afternoon, took statements, and left with a USB drive full of evidence. Tom didn't press criminal charges just yet, but he sent copies of everything to his lawyer and made it known. This was no longer a simple boundary dispute. It was theft of service. It was willful tampering. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. Tom rebuilt the gate stronger. Then he built the toll system. Tom had expected resistance. What he hadn't expected was sheer brazen defiance. Less than 48 hours after the attempted gate bypass, his cameras caught 5 different Willow Creek vehicles tailgating through behind delivery vans or slipping in when the gate reopened for approved guests. Some drivers tried to hide their plates with paper or mud. One SUV even reversed into the drive just to avoid triggering the license plate reader. Tom's toll system, however, had already been upgraded. With night vision, plate snapshots, and audio logs, every vehicle was cataloged, time-stamped, and stored in a cloud-based ledger ready for legal action. Karen, for her part, wasn't hiding anymore. She had doubled down boldly. That week, she sent a notice to Willow Creek residents claiming Tom was extorting the neighborhood and illegally charging for access to a commonly utilized community connector. In the same letter, she advised residents to continue using the road as usual while legal action proceeds. It was as if she thought sheer force of will, or numbers, could override the law. Tom, meanwhile, had shifted strategy. Instead of chasing individual drivers, he sent certified toll notices to the Willow Creek HOA itself, billing them for unauthorized road usage under Colorado's Civil Code. Each violation came with a timestamp, vehicle photo, and fee of $250. The total invoice, over $18,000 and growing by the day. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, while Tom was returning from the feed store, he found a car parked sideways across his driveway, blocking access entirely. It was Karen's Lexus. She was standing next to it with two other HOA board members, clipboards in hand, camera phone at the ready. As Tom stepped out of his truck, she immediately launched into a tirade. "This harassment ends today," she snapped. "You're illegally collecting tolls, operating an unregistered checkpoint, and blocking community infrastructure. We've filed a formal injunction, and you'll be hearing from our attorney." Tom didn't let her finish. "Karen, I've given you every chance to stop. I have video of you orchestrating a manual override of my gate. That's tampering. It's criminal. And now you're impeding ingress and egress on private property. You've gone from civil trespass to outright crime." One of the board members, clearly more nervous than Karen, tugged at her sleeve. "Maybe we should talk to our lawyer again before—" "No!" Karen barked. "This man thinks he can bully an entire neighborhood. We're standing up to him." Tom took out his phone and began recording. "Thanks, Karen, that's obstruction. You're blocking a permitted vehicle on private land while being recorded doing it. Keep going." Her face twisted, but she backed off just enough for him to pull in. Within the hour, Tom forwarded the footage to his attorney and the sheriff's office, but this time, he went further. He filed formal charges: criminal trespass, interference with electronic infrastructure, and conspiracy to defraud via unauthorized use of a private utility. The sheriff's deputies didn't hesitate. 2 days later, they showed up at Karen's door with a warrant. Tom watched from a respectful distance as Karen was handcuffed on her front porch in full view of her precious community. Her screaming about abuse of power and property rights was drowned out by the click of camera shutters from local news reporters who'd caught wind of the feud. Tom didn't gloat. He just went home, checked his toll records, and sent out another invoice, this time for legal expenses. The war was no longer about a road, it was about principle, and Karen had just made it federal. With Karen in custody and media interest mounting, Tom seized the moment. He wasn't content to simply watch the traffic die down. He wanted to ensure there would be no second coming of Willow Creek's arrogance. So, with his attorney's guidance, he enacted the next phase of his response: formal toll enforcement through the county civil court. Using the evidence gathered over weeks, footage, timestamps, license plates, and copies of HOA communications, Tom filed claims against both individual repeat offenders and the HOA itself. Each charge came with a financial penalty. For some, it was hundreds of dollars. For the HOA, it was over $35,000 in cumulative tolls and damage fees. The toll system, once merely a deterrent, had now become a fully legal infrastructure. Tom registered it as a limited private access route under county code, granting him authority to issue violation notices and pursue unpaid fees through small claims court or liens. Word spread fast. Within 2 weeks, more than a dozen drivers from Willow Creek quietly mailed in checks. Others tried to fight back, but the evidence was airtight. One HOA member even submitted a written apology along with their payment, stating they'd never fully understood the gravity of the situation. The HOA, however, doubled down again. Their new acting president, a man named Bryce Lanigan, attempted to invalidate the tolls by arguing the road served as a public utility in practice. But in court, Tom's attorney systematically dismantled their case. She presented satellite images showing the road's seclusion, title deeds confirming no public right-of-way, and expert testimony affirming that no legitimate easement had ever been filed. The judge was unmoved by HOA theatrics. He not only upheld Tom's right to enforce tolls, but also imposed a $10,000 sanction on the HOA for filing a frivolous counterclaim. Karen's case, meanwhile, escalated in criminal court. The evidence of her instructing a subordinate to bypass an electronic security system, combined with video of her blocking access and promoting unlawful use, sealed her fate. Charged with criminal trespass, tampering with private infrastructure, and attempted fraud, she accepted a plea deal. 90 days in jail, 2 years probation, and over $20,000 in restitution, most of it payable directly to Tom. The story exploded across local news and property law forums online. Tom was dubbed the tollkeeper of Harper Road by one blogger, and despite his aversion to the spotlight, the nickname stuck. Reporters requested interviews. Real estate attorneys cited his case in seminars on landowner rights. And perhaps most tellingly, a dozen neighboring communities reached out to learn how to set up similar enforcement systems on their own private roads. Tom didn't care for the fame. What mattered was the silence. For the first time in months, the road was clear. No traffic, no tailgaters, no arrogant HOA memos shoved into his mailbox. Just gravel, just wind, just peace. Tom stood at the edge of his now quiet road, arms folded as he watched a lone breeze carry dust across the gravel. It had been weeks since he'd seen an unauthorized vehicle cross the threshold. No tire tracks, no gate alerts in the middle of the night, no clipped intercom cables. Willow Creek had gone completely silent. The lawsuits had taken their toll, literally, and with the HOA bleeding money from legal fees and settlements, their board had been forced to hold an emergency meeting. The result, Karen Reed was permanently removed and several board members resigned in disgrace. Bryce Lanigan, who had tried to bluff his way through court, stepped down quietly after being named in a separate civil claim. The HOA was fractured, its influence diminished, and its reputation shattered. Tom didn't celebrate with noise. Instead, he made a choice to formalize the boundaries that had been blurred for far too long. He filed paperwork to establish his road as a toll-by-agreement private access lane with strictly limited use permits. For a steep fee, $1,000 annually, nearby residents outside of Willow Creek could apply for approved access if they had business on or near his property. It wasn't about the money. It was about principle, boundaries, and respect. To his surprise, a few neighbors actually applied. Not from Willow Creek, of course. They knew better, but from surrounding ranches and homes whose owners had stayed out of the drama. These were people who had watched from afar, silently rooting for Tom's stand against entitlement. One older couple, the Harleys, even delivered a handwritten thank you note along with their application, praising him for defending the rights of individual landowners when no one else would. Tom also received an unmarked envelope one morning. Inside was a check, unsigned, with a sticky note attached. From one of the silent majority. "You were right. Sorry we didn't say anything sooner." He never learned who sent it. As spring arrived, Tom decided to open his property for something new. A one-day community event. Not for Willow Creek, of course, but for his true neighbors. He sent out invitations for a barbecue, naming it the Respect the Road Cookout. It wasn't about rubbing it in anyone's face. It was a way to close the loop. Good food, good music, no politics. Just people who understood that fences aren't meant to divide, but to protect. The party was a surprising success. Even a few former Willow Creek residents who'd since moved out showed up, sheepishly offering thanks and expressing how miserable the HOA had been under Karen's rule. No one mentioned the lawsuits, and Tom didn't press them for details. He didn't need to. He had his road. He had his land. He had his peace. And above all, he had his status, not just as a property owner, but as someone who refused to be steamrolled by collective entitlement masked as community interest. Months passed, and the dust finally settled, both literally and figuratively. The once contentious stretch of gravel now lay untouched except by the occasional delivery truck or the quiet hum of Tom's own vehicle. The gate, ever watchful, stood as both a barrier and a monument. It didn't just block entry, it symbolized a boundary won, defended, and now respected. Tom had returned to the life he originally sought when he left the corporate world, one of quiet purpose, natural rhythm, and unshakable autonomy. Karen served her time without fanfare. She reemerged in the community diminished, her name now whispered with disdain in HOA circles that once sang her praises. Willow Creek had changed. Board turnover, budget losses, and internal distrust had sparked reform. Tom didn't concern himself with the details. Whatever healing they pursued was their business now. His war was over. One late summer afternoon, as Tom repaired a fence along his southern pasture, he noticed a familiar car slowing near the road's edge, just before the gate. It was Karen. She didn't cross the line. Instead, she stepped out, hesitated, and simply waved. Tom returned the gesture, neither warm nor cold. She didn't approach. She didn't speak. But the gesture was enough. A silent acknowledgement of the line she'd crossed, and the one she wouldn't again. Later that week, Tom replaced the sign at the gate with a new one. Still private, still bold, but this time it read, "Respect builds roads. Entitlement gets you nowhere." The ranch remained quiet but not isolated. Neighbors came by more often now, some to talk, some to help with fencing, others just to share coffee and stories. Tom had become unintentionally a local symbol of standing firm. He didn't wear it like a badge, but he didn't shrug it off either. He had drawn a line and made sure it stayed.